So, as always, I'll begin with a chant. Om Parthaya Pratibodhitam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Grathitam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitam Ritavarshinim Bhagavatim Ashtadashadhyayinim Amba Tvam Anusandadhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshinim Vasudeva Sutan Devam Kamsachanuramardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum Mukham Karoti Vachalam Pangum Langhayate Girim Yatkripa Tamaham Vande Paramananda Madhavam. Om, O Mother Bhagavad Gita, we meditate on you, who were made known to Partha by the Lord Narayana himself, you who were included in the Mahabharata by the ancient sage Vyasa, you, the goddess who rains down the nectar of non-dualism, Advaita, in 18 chapters, you, the destroyer of relative existence. We worship Krishna, world teacher, son of Vasudeva, supreme delight of his mother Devaki, and the slayer of the demons Kamsa and Chanura. We adore that supremely blissful Madhava, Krishna, by whose grace the mute are made eloquent and the lame are enabled to cross over mountains. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. Om peace, peace, peace be unto us all. So first, welcome back to everyone to our Gita class for the Vedanta Society of Greater Austin. I hope everyone is well and that people have had a good summer. So after a 1-month break, we are back and we'll continue with our study of the Gita where we left off. We had begun, we were in chapter 2 and we had just begun when we had the summer break, the Sthita Prajna Lakshanas, the qualities of a person of steady wisdom. So that came about because Sri Krishna was teaching Arjuna about the need for self-control, for samatvam, that is equanimity in the midst of all circumstances, the need to give up all thoughts of success and failure, to do that which is to be done without regard to success or failure. That is, to do it the best you can, but without regard to whether it succeeds or fails. The work is ours, not the fruits of the labor. And so he had taught all of this and about the self-knowledge, about the glory of the self. And so then Arjuna naturally asked in verse 54 of this chapter that Sthita Prajnasya ka bhasha samadhistasya keshava Sthita dhir kim prabhasheta kimasita vrajeta kim. So basically he's asking in this verse that what is the nature of a person of steady wisdom? Now this is the first time in the Gita that term has come up, Sthita Prajna, but Arjuna uses it because obviously the person Sri Krishna has described in earlier verses is a person of steady wisdom. And so he asked, what are the characteristics of a person of steady wisdom? One whose buddhi, one whose higher mind is steady, sthitadhi, a person of established higher mind, where the higher consciousness is established in its own luminosity and fixed on the truth. So how does such a person sit? How do they walk? How do they speak? what is their nature. And so then we get to the rest of the chapter 2, describing the nature of the Sthita Prajna. And so that's what we're in the midst of. And so in verse 58, chapter 2, 58, that's where we are to begin. Sri Krishna says, Yada samharate chayam kurmonganiva sarvashaha indriyan indriyartebhyas tasya prajna pratishtita. So here he says, Tasya prajna pratishtita. Such a one's wisdom is established. That is, such a one has steady wisdom. Their wisdom is firmly established. Which person? The person who yada samharate chayam kurmongani vasarvashaha indriyan indriyartebhyas. One who is able to withdraw the mind from the senses, just as a tortoise withdraws its limbs into its shell. When it's in danger, of course, in the case of the tortoise, it pulls its limbs in. Those of you who have seen, not all tortoises and not all turtles can do that, but some can. Like in America, there's a box turtle, eastern box turtle and western box turtle, that can pull its limbs in completely. And even on the front of the shell, there's a hinged bottom of the shell that closes up. And so it closes in the head and all of the limbs. And the tail also swings around and comes inside the shell. And then the two halves of the shell close up and the hinge closes like that. And so the tortoise does that for protection. But the yogi is not worried about protection. The yogin or the one who is established in steady wisdom, they do it in order to fix their awareness in the higher truth, in spiritual truth, in the self, the Atman, or in God. Normally the senses, the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the skin, which wants to touch everything, our senses are always going outward to the outer world. We want to engage with the outer world. I want to see things. I want to hear. Somebody's talking over there. I want to hear what they're saying, even if it has nothing to do with me. Something catches my eye out of the corner of my eye. I see something moving over there. I want to see. What is that? And the skin always wants to touch, to feel things. What does this feel like? What does that feel like? If there's a smell, we want to smell it. If there's a taste, something edible, we want to taste it. So the senses are always grasping for outer experience. But the problem with that is that the mind follows along behind the senses. And if the senses are restless, grasping at experience, always trying to grab something, being distracted by whatever comes into their field of experience, then the mind also is following along. And so the mind of the ordinary person is being dragged by the senses to the outer world. And so the person of steady wisdom, the Sthita Prajna, is one who can, at will, can withdraw the mind from the senses, just as the tortoise withdraws its limbs into its shell, and can focus the mind internally, either on God or on the self. It doesn't matter, they ultimately come to be the same, but the paths are a little different, depending on whether you are self-oriented or God-oriented. But it doesn't matter, either one works in the context of this verse, because the Sthita Prajna can be a devotional Sthita Prajna or a jnani, the person on the path of knowledge, Sthita Prajna. So this is a very important verse, and it gives us a beautiful metaphor. In Vedanta philosophy, as in Mimamsa, Purva Mimamsa philosophy, it said that there are 6 ways, 6 means of valid knowledge. I won't go into all of them, because only one is pertinent here. But let me just, to give you an idea of what these 6 means of knowledge mean, just give you an idea that one is when the senses are in a healthy condition and properly functioning, then sense knowledge gives us knowledge of the outer world. And then through reason, through logic, we can figure out things that the senses the senses can see some things, but there's some things that we don't know what they mean until we figure it out logically. And so then logic is another properly performed logical operations and another means of having valid experience, valid knowledge. Another is agama, that is valid testimony from the scriptures or from people who we know to be trustworthy, who tell us something. Like a person who comes back from a South Pacific island that we've never heard about, and they tell us, oh, I went to such and such an island, it is so beautiful. And we know this person, that they're a truthful person, they're trustworthy, and so then we believe them. So that's another way. We haven't seen it, and logic does us no good to figure out that there is an island there by that name. That's not a matter of logic. But someone comes and tells us who's trustworthy, and we believe it. And so in the same way, the scriptures tell us about the Atman, tell us about Ishvara, about God and about the self. And because we know the scriptures are trustworthy, we know that there is the truth of the self and that God is. So that's valid testimony. So these are three ways that we know the truth: through sense perception, through logic, and through valid testimony. But there are three others, according to Vedanta, three other means of knowledge. I won't go into the others except one of them, and that is upama, that is through analogy. That analogy gives us a type of knowledge that we don't get through the other means of knowledge. And so here, this image of the tortoise drawing in its limbs, that gives us a feeling for the truth that neither logic nor the sense perception gives us. When we hear about how the tortoise draws in its limbs, it gives us an idea of how I am to withdraw my consciousness from the senses, from the outer world. So that also is a particular means of knowledge, which is often used in the scriptures and by great teachers like Sri Ramakrishna, who always used metaphors, analogies, parables, in order to express the truth. So that's what is happening here. So the running translation of this, in this particular verse, I prefer Swami Swarupananda's Gita. I also have here Swami Vireshwarananda's, which I follow mostly for this class now. But Swami Swarupananda's here, I like his translation here more. He says, when also like the tortoise drawing its limbs, he can completely, that is the man of steady wisdom, can completely withdraw the senses from their objects. Then his wisdom becomes steady. So when we can do that, when we can withdraw the mind at will, then wisdom becomes steady. Then verse 59 says, Vishaya vinivartante niraharasya dehinaha rasavarjam rasopyasya param drishtva nivartate. So this says that the Vishaya vinivartante niraharasya dehinaha, that the objects of the senses, they fall away from a person who is very austere by nature. That is a person, not a person, he's not speaking of a person of steady wisdom here, but just someone who is very abstemious by nature. Some people, even if they're not spiritual, they're very abstemious by nature. They lead an extremely simple and austere life. Sometimes you find, especially in the past, there were great scientists like that who were not interested in spiritual truth, but they were devoted to science. And they gave all of their mind to science, and so they didn't care about food and drink and all other things. They were just doing their research. And so like that, there are people, and there are also spiritual aspirants who have not yet attained anything, but they are very austere. They believe in the practice of self-control and austerity. And so the objects of the senses fall away from them. Just as the case of recorded cases of great scientists who their wives would come to them and say, why haven't you eaten? And he said, oh, I had no idea. He said, well, you missed breakfast, you missed lunch, and now it's supper and you're not coming for supper either. And the person was so forgetful because of being involved in the research that they had not even noticed that meal times were passing. And so, like that, the objects of the senses fall away from us through just the act of self-control. But then it says, rasavarjam, but the taste for the objects has not disappeared. So it's not that the scientist who is so involved in research that they forgot everything. It's not that they no longer have any desires or anything. It's that temporarily those are in abeyance because their mind is focused on something else. So they haven't attained to steady wisdom. It's just a matter of their interest is lying somewhere else. And so the objects of the senses have fallen away from them. Or you see sometimes people who are spiritual aspirants, but who are very austere. And so they don't touch coffee, they don't touch tea. I remember once, many years ago, back in the early 70s, some of our brahmacharyas from Chicago had gone to India. And they were talking to a Swami in Nagpur, an old Swami. And the old Swami asked them if they would like tea or coffee. And they said, yes, sure. And they asked him if he was going to take tea or coffee too. And he said no. And they said, oh, what about hot chocolate? And he said, no, I don't touch any hard stuff. Now, of course, in English, hard stuff means with alcohol. But he said, no, I don't touch hard stuff. He meant coffee, tea, and hot chocolate because they have caffeine. So that was, to him, that was hard stuff. So he was abstemious, very austere. So from such people also, the objects of the senses fall away. But until they have steady wisdom, the taste for things is still there. So I can say, no, I don't take coffee, tea, or even hot chocolate. I won't take it because I'm austere. But it's not because there's not some recognition that it tastes good or that I would like it. It's that I feel that to know, according to my principles, I would rather go without caffeine. I won't have any stimulant like that. So it's a matter of principle, not a matter of having transcended it. So here, the objects of the senses, they fall away from the one who is the embodied person who is extremely abstemious, embodied, dehina, a person who's identified with the body. But rasavarjam, but the taste is still remaining. But then the rest of the verse says, raso api asya param drishtva nivartate. But even the taste itself, the rasa, the taste for the sense objects, that itself, nivartate, it disappears, param drishtva, having perceived it's a supreme truth. So in the person of steady wisdom, they have perceived the supreme truth. They've seen God, they've seen the self. And then the rasa, the taste itself, the very possibility of desire, that has been destroyed. Because having seen the supreme, who is going to go after sense objects? They appear so paltry, so insignificant, so tasteless because of the infinite bliss and infinite contentment found in the self. Realizing the self or realizing God, you've attained to that which is everything. What more do you want? Then are you going to run after a rasagola, going to run after a little snack, or go to see something that looks pretty? No, the sense organs no longer can offer you anything because you've seen the supreme. And that is all you want. So the running translation here goes, from an abstemious embodied being, sense objects fall away, but not the relish for them, the rasa. The relish doesn't fall away. But even this relish of the man of steady wisdom ceases when that supreme being is realized. So that being seen, then all desire for anything else disappears. I've told this story before, but I'll tell it again here because it's pertinent. That Swami Nirvananandaji, whom I knew at Bellarmat when he was vice president of the order, he was a disciple of Swami Brahmananda, Thakur's spiritual son, Swami Brahmananda. And Swami Brahmananda had blessed him that he have the knowledge of Brahman in this very life. And so in his old age, when I was around in Bellarmat, and Senior Swami asked him one day, Maharaj, Swami Brahmananda told you that you would attain to the knowledge of Brahman in this very life. Have you had that knowledge of Brahman? And so Swami Nirvananandaji said, by the grace of Thakur, by the grace of the Holy Mother, by the grace of Swami Vivekananda, and by the grace of Swami Brahmananda, my Guru, not a single desire arises in my mind. And so the Swami said, Maharaj, is that the same as the knowledge of Brahman? And so again, Swami Nirvananandaji said the same thing. And a third time he said the same thing. But we can infer from that yes, that means that he has attained to the highest. Because param drishtva nivartate, having, as it says right here, having seen the supreme, having seen the absolute reality, then the very desire itself disappears. And it's only in that condition that one can say, not a single desire arises in my mind. So Swami Nirvanananda was not trying to be austere. He was not trying to divert his mind from anything. He was not trying to live up to an ideal or something. He had attained to the ideal. There was no effort whatsoever. There was the complete absence of any desire because he had been eternally fulfilled by the realization of God. So from an abstemious embodied being, sense objects fall off, but not the relish for them. But even this relish of the person of steady wisdom ceases when that supreme being is realized. And so now let us come to verse 60. Yatato yapi kaunteya purushasya vipastitaha indriyani pramathini haranti prasabham manaha. So here this says, Yatato hi api kaunteya purushasya vipastitaha indriyani pramatini haranti prasabham manaha. So even the struggling wise person, Yatato, even the struggling wise person, O Kaunteya, the Purushasya Vipastitaha, the Vipastitaha, the wise Purusha person, Yatato, struggling. So, O Arjuna, even the struggling wise person, Indriyani Pramathini Haranti Prasabham Manaha. The turbulent senses, Pramathini Indriyani, the turbulent senses take away his mind. So the turbulent senses, O son of Kunti, forcibly lead astray the mind of even the struggling wise person. So this means the spiritual aspirant who has advanced on the spiritual path, but has not attained to the highest, that even for such a one who has advanced far on the path, but has not yet attained to illumination, one who is wise, one who understands the spiritual path, understands spiritual wisdom, and has gone far along the path, even such a one, his senses lead his mind astray. The senses take the mind away. There are many such examples in the scriptures and in everyday life of people who had become highly respected for their spirituality, for their wisdom, who then suddenly something arises in the mind and they're not careful. Some samskara from the past comes, and out of curiosity they follow the samskara, the mental impression, the memory or something, or the desire which has arisen. And then soon they find themselves falling from the spiritual path. There are many examples given in the Puranas, the Itihasas, and we see such examples in everyday life as well. So the turbulent senses, O son of Kunti, forcibly lead astray the mind of even the struggling wise person. So that is a warning to all of us that Sri Krishna is giving us. And in the context of speaking of the person who has attained to the highest, for whom the very desire for objects has disappeared. So that again means that until we have attained to the highest, We have to maintain some sort of spiritual alertness. Sri Ramakrishna used to see in the gospel. In the Kotamrita, he says, sadhu sabdhan, over and over again, sadhu sabdhan. And in English, oh sadhu, beware. So the idea of sadhu beware or sadhu sabdhan means that until, as Holy Mother used to say, until you are reduced to a bowl of ashes, an urn of ashes, meaning until you are cremated, then don't relax your effort. Unless you have attained to realization, and then everything is spontaneous. Then there's no effort. Then there's no question of self-control, because that is spontaneous, because all of your desires have been fulfilled eternally. The very possibility of desire has been erased from your mind, and you're aware of the infinite, blissful, beautiful truth. And there's nothing else that can attract the mind. Short of that attainment, we have to be careful. So this is not to make us nervous and to make us insecure. It's to tell us to be careful along the path. Because even when we think that I've attained to a good degree of self-control, I feel secure and I feel safe in my spiritual life, even then through carelessness, pramada, through carelessness, then it's possible to fall from the path. And again, there are many, many examples of that. So then we come to verse 61, where he says, Tani sarvani sanyamya yukta asita matparaha vashehi yasyendriyani tasya prajna pratishtita. So this says that Tani sarvani sanyamya. So to control all of the senses, bring all of the senses under control. The senses of knowledge, what in the Western world we call the senses, and what in India are called the senses of action. We don't call them senses in English, but that's the Vedantic understanding. The senses of action means the hands which grasp, the feet and legs which walk, the mouth which speaks, etc. And so control all of the organs of knowledge, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, etc., and the organs of action. Bring them under control. Tani sarvani sanyamya, having controlled all of these organs, yukta asita matparaha, the person of control, the person whose mind is become yukta, has become meditative. Asita matparaha, sits asita matparaha, with me as the supreme. So again, the idea here is that controlling all of these senses, the self-controlled one should sit meditating on me. That's not that's not the way the verse is constructed in Sanskrit, but that's the good meaning in English, when you have to rework things so that it fits in English. Controlling all of these senses, the self-control, the yukta, the self-control should sit, asita, meditating on me, matparaha, meditating on me. Vashehi yasyandriyani tasya prajna pratishtita, because one whose organs are established in control, such a one has steady wisdom. So again, the whole discussion here is about the person of steady wisdom, the person whose wisdom has become established. There's no more fear of falling. The mind has become perfected. The mind is established in the truth. And so, controlling all these senses, the self-controlled one should sit meditating on me, matparaha, meditating on me. Verily, his wisdom is steady, whose senses are under control. So such a one doesn't even have to sit meditating on me, because they are perceiving me everywhere, perceiving God everywhere. But he's saying that for the rest of us, controlling all of these senses, the self-controlled one should sit meditating on me. Why? Because the person of steady wisdom has all of their senses under control. So let us, who are not yet established in the state of a stita prajna, let us control ourselves and sit meditating with our mind established in God, with our mind fixed on God as an effort, as a sadhana, as a spiritual practice. So one, he's talking about the state of attainment in the second half of the verse. Verily his wisdom is steady whose senses are under control. The senses have already become perfectly controlled. That's the person of steady wisdom. And in the first half of the verse, he's telling us what we should do in order to get there, which he describes in the second half. So in the first half, controlling all of these senses, the self-controlled one should sit meditating on me. So we should practice self-control, and we should try to fix the mind on God. So as we do japa, for instance, and this goes for any spiritual practice, but japa is a very common and common practice, especially among our Ramakrishna tradition. So you're sitting doing japa and repeating the mantra, and the mind keeps wandering away. So whenever you find that the mind has wandered away, gently just bring it back and put it again on the mantra and the meaning of the mantra. The meaning of the mantra means the deity that the mantra refers to. Like if it's the name of Ramakrishna, then Ramakrishna himself is the meaning of the mantra. And so you fix your mind on Sri Ramakrishna or on Holy Mother or on Sri Krishna, etc. So you bring the mind back and put it there. And so in that way we practice to keep matparaha, with me as with their mind fixed on me. That's the way we do it. The mind runs away, we bring it back. The mind runs away, we bring it back. The mind runs away, we bring it back. And over years of practice, if we do practice every day and we practice diligently, after years, we begin to find that the mind stays put longer and longer and longer. And so that's the way that we practice. There's no substitute for practice. So controlling all of these senses, the self-controlled one should sit meditating on me. Verily his wisdom is steady, whose senses are under control. And then we come to verses 62 and 63, which are taken together because they all form one continual stream of thought. Dhyayato vishayan pumsa sangasteshu upajayate sangat sanjayate kama kamat krodho bhijayate krodhat bhavati sammoha sammohat smriti vibhramaha smriti bhramshat buddhinasho buddhinashat pranasyati. So here dhyayato vishayan pumsa sangaha teshu upajayate. By thinking about objects of the senses, attachment to them arises. By thinking of the objects of the senses, attachment for them arises. And we can see that if we get into the habit of watching our own minds, watching ourselves, how the mind works, we'll see that many times there's something that we see that we like. And at first it's just, oh, that's a nice thing. Then we start thinking, oh, gee, if I had that, that would be nice. I'd like to have that. It'd be very pretty. It'd be nice in the house and things. And then we start thinking about it more and more. As we think about it, then we start researching on it, and we go back and look at it again and think about it over and over. Gradually, a desire becomes stronger and stronger until finally it becomes uncontrollable. Then we have, I've got to have it. I've got to have this. I've got to go out and get this. And so that all started with just an innocent little recognition that something was interesting, something was pretty, something was nice. And then we think about it more and more until something that we didn't really need becomes something that we have to have. We can't sit still without having it. And so that, of course, doesn't mean for us that we can't have nice things. No, it doesn't mean that. It means that we should be careful what we allow the mind to think about, because thinking about something over and over again, gradually attachment to it is created. So be aware of what your mind is dwelling on, where your mind is settling, where it keeps going back to. Because if you allow it to keep going back, then gradually attachment to that is going to get stronger and stronger. So that's the first line, that dhyayato vishayan pumsa sangasteshu pujayate. By thinking about Here the word is meditating upon, but it means thinking about, or turning over in the mind. Thoughts of an object of the senses, we develop an attachment for it. Then, sangat sanjayate kama, kamat krodho vijayate. Sangat sanjayate kama. Out of attachment, that is, after we've thought about something, we begin to feel an attachment for it. Out of that, desire arises. Oh, I want to have it. So first it's seeing something that's pretty and thinking that's nice, and then thinking about it over and over again, we begin to, the mind wants to stay there and think about it more and more. And then the idea comes, no, I want to have it. Sanjayate kama. Desire is born out of that thinking about something over and over again. Then kamat krodho vijayate. And out of desire for the object, anger arises. So here there's something missing in the middle. And Sri Krishna is leaving that for us to understand. So you're thinking about something, you get attached to it because you keep thinking about it. And out of that attachment arises the desire to possess. I want to have it, I want to enjoy it. And then out of that desire, he says, comes anger. So how does anger come out of desire? The missing step in here is that when our desire is frustrated, then we get angry. When I want something and somebody comes in the way, then I get angry. Say, to take a typical, very mundane example, it's Black Friday and you're out to buy, take advantage of sales on Black Friday. And you've waited for hours outside of the store for it to open so that you can get in first, or will be one of the first to get in and get something before it's all gone. So you get into the doors are finally open. You've waited for hours outside, and you get into the store. You run to where you think the thing that you might want is, and you see from a distance that there's only one left. And then somebody from behind you comes running, pushes you out of the way and grabs it. And now there's nothing left. So what you had waited for all night, for hours, someone comes and pushes you out of the way and takes it. And so then, of course, you're going to feel angry. But why? Because your desire has been frustrated. So the psychology here is this. You think about something, and it develops attachment. You think more and more about it, and the mind begins to get fixated on it. Out of that fixation comes desire. I want to possess it. I want to enjoy it. And out of that, when that desire is frustrated, then comes anger. The problem in life is that the desires are being frustrated constantly. Even a simple, ordinary, understandable desire, innocent in itself, like driving to work, and you just want to be calm and quiet, and you just want to get to work. You don't want any disturbances. You know the work day ahead is going to bring enough problems, and so you just want to have a peaceful drive to work. And then somebody else on the freeway comes and cuts you off and almost runs you off the road, and so you get angry. Why are you angry? Because someone frustrated you by causing a problem that you neither needed nor expected. Nobody needs to be cut off. Nobody wants to be run off the road. And so that's natural enough. But the psychology is there that you're angry because somebody has frustrated. You just wanted to be left in peace. And this guy didn't leave you in peace. And so you're angry. So understanding the psychology here is important. And then it goes on in the next verse, Krodhat bhavati sammoha. Out of anger comes a delusion. When we get angry, we lose all perspective. When we get angry, we lose perspective. And so that should always be remembered. That's why we should try not to get angry. As Swamiji said, it's better to get angry than to just suppress anger. So the idea is not to suppress anger, to put on a smiling face when you're actually raging with anger, to put on a smiling face as if you're not angry. No. That's no good. Sometimes it's better just to express your anger rather than to pretend that you're not angry when you are. But the higher way to go is to control anger by realizing there's nothing for me to get angry over. Anger does me no good. Anger only causes delusion of my mind. I lose perspective. That's why if we get angry enough, a person who tends to go into a rage, you can even hit and harm somebody. You can physically hurt somebody just out of anger by hitting them, by slapping them, or even in extreme cases by killing them, of course. And so it's anger makes us lose all perspective. Something that how many times all of us have done something or said something out of anger, and at the time we felt fully justified because this person did such and such, and I won't let them get away with it. I'm going to show them. And so we get angry, we say something, we do something, and then afterwards we spend days in regret. Why did I do that? Why did I do it? I lost control. I did things, I said things which were completely unnecessary, and now I'm left in regret. So out of anger comes delusion. That is, we lose perspective. And then sammohat smriti vibhramaha. Out of delusion, we lose our memory. So here, memory means something special. Memory here doesn't mean that we lose, we forget where we're from, we forget our address, we forget our telephone number. No, it doesn't mean that the thing stored in memory. It means we lose hold on the memory of what's important and what's not important. What is true and what is false. We lose our hold on the truth, on spiritual truth. We forget what is true, what is false, what is real in this life, what is not real. And we've allowed something which is ultimately unreal to completely ruin our day and make us angry. So out of delusion comes the destruction of misery. And then in the last line he says, Smriti Bhramshad Buddhinasho. From the destruction of memory, that is, from the destruction of our memory of the truth, of what is true, buddhinasha, the intelligence is destroyed. And buddhinashat pranasyati. And when the intelligence is destroyed, then one is destroyed. Then the value of one's life is destroyed. And so this is a very important process that all of us experience. All of us can observe in our own lives how this works. But once we see it, the problem doesn't immediately go away. But once we see it, we know what's happening. And when it happens again, we can check ourselves and say, oh, I'm getting upset. This is what's going to happen if I give into it. So let me calm down. Let me calm down. That's why people say, when you're angry, count to 10 before you do anything or say anything. That's to give you a little time to catch your awareness and realize that no, if I express my anger, if I give in to my anger, then bad things are going to happen, as they always happen. So in the moment something happens and we react and we're angry in the moment and we want to punch right now, want to give it to the person right now while I'm hot. Let me not cool down, because if I cool down, I won't punch him, and I want to punch him right now. And so that we want to act right now while I'm still angry. But if I can remember by thinking at other calm moments about this truth expressed in these two verses, then I can remember, no, but every time I do that, I'm always sorry afterwards. So let me count to 10. Let me wait. Let me just wait and give a proper thought-out response rather than acting on the spur of the moment, which I always regret. Let me not regret it this time. So again, this is the process. So reading the running translation here, for a person thinking of sense objects, there grows an attachment for them, for the sense objects. From that attachment arises desire, that is the desire to possess, to experience. From desire, when it is frustrated, comes anger. From anger results delusion. From delusion results confusion of the memory. From confusion of memory results destruction of intelligence, buddhinasha. And from destruction of intelligence, a person perishes. So this is a very, very beautiful analysis of our own daily experience. So if we read this in context of our own daily lives and see how it is that these things work, then we begin to get an understanding of how the mind functions. What does that help? It helps a great deal because, as it's said, knowledge is power. So not every knowledge is power, but knowledge about how things work is power, because if you know how something works, then you can intervene, then you can modify, then you can manipulate the working of things. It's the same with the external world. Science seeks to understand the way the world works, and once a process in nature is understood, technology can come in and manipulate it and take advantage of the way it works in order to make it work better for humankind. That's all the technology is the effort to take advantage of our knowledge of the way things work in nature so that we can manipulate that working to our own advantage. And so in spiritual life also, by understanding how and observing carefully and over time, again and again, observing how it is that the mind works, how it is the mind works, how the senses work, how life works, then once I've understood that, then I can get control, I can intervene. When I see how anger comes from desire because desire is being frustrated, then I can intervene and stop the anger. Not at first, it doesn't work the first time, it doesn't work the first 10 times, but gradually I begin to remember at the time of getting angry, oh, I'm feeling that same rising of anger within me. I know that that's a danger signal. Let me back off. Let me stop here. Let me stop it here. Let me go out for a walk. Let me get away from the situation, just leave it. And then come back when I'm calmed down so that I can give an appropriate response. Or when I see my mind just idly thinking about something and it keeps going back to that thing, and I know it's something that I don't really need, I don't have money for or something, then no, tell the mind, think about something else, forget about that. Because the more you think about it, the more the desire to have it is going to come. You keep going back to that page in the magazine to see the advertisement. Oh, that's so nice. I would be so happy if I had that. I don't have money for it, but it would be so nice. And so in that way, going back to it again and again, the desire gets stronger until we can't control it. And then we take out a loan to buy something we didn't really need to begin with. So understanding is power. So let's see, I'll just take one more verse, and then if there are any questions, I'll take those. Because the next verse sort of brings those two verses into some summary. 64. Raga dvesha viyuktaistu vishayan indriyaicharan atmavashyair vidhe atma prasadam adhigacchati. So, however, after saying this, Sri Krishna says, however, the person who has become freed from raga and dvesha, been freed from attraction and aversion, freed from desire and hatred, and whose senses are under the control, are self-controlled. Such a one, even when the senses, the controlled senses, are experiencing the outer world, prasadam adhigacchati. Such a one remains in a state of pacification of the mind. So the running translation is, but that person of controlled self, vidheyatma, that person of controlled self, who moves about amidst the sense objects, with the senses governed by the self, atma vashayer, vishayan indriyes charan. So, but that person of controlled self who moves about amidst the sense objects with the senses governed by the self and free from attachment and aversion, raga dvesha viyukta, he attains serenity. Prasadam adhigacchati. Prasadam adhigacchati. So as most of you know, certainly those of you born in India, that prasad doesn't mean primarily the food we eat after puja. That is called prasad because it has come, it has been touched by the deity. It has been blessed by the deity. And so it's a conveyor of prasada. It's a conveyor of blessing. So prasad that we eat is prasad because it has the Ishvara prasad. It has the blessing of God. And so here prasadam adhigacchati, one experiences the blessing or one experiences serenity. One experiences serenity by having the senses controlled by the self. And so then we can move about in the world, move amongst the objects of the senses without being disturbed. Because param drishtva nivartate, having perceived the Supreme, then the very desire for objects has disappeared. So that may seem like a long ways away, but he's giving us here the practice that by bringing the senses under control, gradually we begin to see that the mind becomes calm. The more I give way to my desires and just run after whatever the mind and the senses want, the more disturbed my mind gets. But when I can bring the mind into a state of calmness, then I begin to experience the blessing of serenity. So let's stop here for today. And next time we will start on verse 65, coming towards the end of chapter 2. So perhaps next weekend we may finish chapter 2. We certainly won't go further, but we probably will finish chapter 2 next time. The Stita Prajna, the verses on the Stita Prajna. These verses from verse 54 of chapter 2 to the end, 72, those are that's the part on the Stita Prajna, and that many people recite every day. In fact, at our ashrama in Gretz in France, I don't know, I can't remember if they still do that, but in Swami Ritajanandaji's time, back in the 1980s when I stayed there for a month, that time every evening the devotees would gather after supper, and they would have a little program, a group reading or music or something. And at the beginning of the gathering after supper, there was a old Frenchman, Jean was his name, a very old Frenchman who was a disciple, I believe, of Swami Siddheshwaranandaji, the original Swami in France. He would recite in French these verses, verse 54 to 72 of chapter 2. So every day they would hear in French this discussion of the nature of the Stita Prajna. So the Stita Prajna is an attainment, but for us it's an ideal that we try to practice.